At my annual Christmas party, I overheard my daughter-in-law whisper to her sister-in-law, "Let's put her in a nursing home." I stayed silent, still smiling as if nothing had happened. When it was time for Secret Santa, I gave her a gift that knocked her right off her chair. I'm glad you're here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. The Christmas tree lights bathed the living room in a warm golden glow, their reflections flickering across the ornaments and tinsel. I carried a tray of eggnog, carefully balancing it as I made my way to the kitchen for refills, savoring the comforting scent of pine mixed with cinnamon and nutmeg. My annual family Christmas gathering was in full swing. The air was alive with laughter, the low hum of holiday music, and the animated chatter of my grandchildren, their tiny hands tugging at presents and giggling with unrestrained joy. In this house, the home I had nurtured and maintained for 35 years, every sound and sight felt like a testament to my life. At 58, these moments were precious. The ones that reminded me why I endured everything, why I kept going despite the aches and the disappointments. "You sure you don't need help, Mom?" My son James called from the couch, barely lifting his gaze from his phone. "I'm fine, dear," I replied automatically. My arthritis had flared up again, making my joints stiff and uncooperative, but complaining had never been in my nature. I had learned long ago that endurance was quieter than complaint, that resilience often spoke through silence. Almost at the kitchen, I froze. From the hallway leading to the guest bathroom came hushed voices, deliberate and charged with tension. I didn't intend to eavesdrop, but something in the tone made me pause, my heartbeat quickening. "I don't know how much longer I can take it," Margot, my daughter-in-law, whispered to my niece. My chest constricted as my mind registered the words. My heart stuttered, a sharp, unexpected jolt. They could only be talking about one person. "James doesn't say anything?" my niece asked softly. "Oh, please," Margot scoffed, her tone dripping with exasperation. "He feels guilty, but he knows she's becoming impossible. I've been looking into places. Nice ones, but still." My knuckles whitened around the tray as if it were suddenly made of stone. The woman I had welcomed into my family, whose wedding I had helped fund, whose children I'd babysat twice a week so she could enjoy her time at the spa, she wanted to put me in a home. Margot continued, slipping into Portuguese, a language she sometimes used when she was emotional. "Vamos, Mandarela, promisso." My grasp of Portuguese wasn't perfect, but I knew enough to understand. The words stung sharper than any insult. "It's the only solution. We need to send that old hag to a nursing home." The tray in my hands suddenly felt impossibly heavy, like it was weighing down not only my arms but my very soul. The realization settled over me in sickening clarity. This wasn't just about caring for me. They were scheming, plotting their inheritance, thinking about the house, thinking about themselves. "What about the house?" my niece asked, her voice barely audible. "James is an only child. Once she's settled somewhere, we'll finally have some breathing room. This place is worth at least $700,000. The pieces clicked together like jagged shards of glass, slicing through my composure. I should have confronted them right then, demanded answers, dropped the tray, and let my fury spill out. But I didn't. I did what I had always done, swallowed the pain, straightened my back, and stepped quietly away. Some wounds cut too deep for immediate reaction, and I was learning again that patience could be both a shield and a weapon. 20 minutes later, we gathered around the Christmas tree for our annual Secret Santa exchange. My hands trembled faintly, betraying the storm inside me as I watched my family unwrap their gifts. My smile felt like a fragile mask, stretched thin over a boiling sea of emotions. Finally, my son announced Mom's gift to Margot. I had spent months searching for the perfect present, a gesture of peace after recent tensions. A vintage emerald brooch, once my grandmother's, a delicate heirloom from a European aristocrat who had adored her in the 1920s. I had intended to eventually pass it down to my granddaughter, but I decided Margot should have it first, as a symbol of goodwill. She tore open the small velvet box, her expression transforming from polite curiosity to stunned disbelief. "Jody, this is," she gasped, eyes wide. "I can't possibly accept this. It's a family heirloom." "I want you to have it," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, warm and calm. "Your family." Her face flushed crimson, and as she stood to thank me, she somehow lost her balance. Down she went, clutching the box, hitting the floor hard. The room erupted in panicked exclamations, James rushing to steady her, while I remained seated, a quiet observer in the eye of the storm. "Are you all right?" James asked, helping her back into her chair. "Yes, yes," she stammered, cheeks burning. It was such a surprise." Our eyes met, and I saw it there, something I had never noticed before. A flash of guilt, shadowed by calculation. She knew exactly what she had been plotting in that hallway, and now she was wondering if I had heard. I smiled, serene and warm, the picture-perfect doting mother-in-law. "Merry Christmas, dear," I whispered. That night, after everyone had left and silence reclaimed the house, I sat alone in the kitchen. An untouched cup of tea grew cold beside me. Finally, the tears came, bitter and hot, as I faced the truth. The family I had devoted my life to, sacrificed for, the very ones I had welcomed and loved without hesitation, they were already planning to replace me. They were plotting to discard me like outdated furniture. But as the clock finally struck midnight, signaling the official end of Christmas Day, something inside me solidified, hardened into a quiet resolve. If they believed I was a fragile, feeble old woman, ready to be swept aside without resistance, they were gravely mistaken. They might think they were mapping out my future, but they had no idea what I was quietly planning for theirs. The week after Christmas blurred into a seamless haze of forced normalcy. I baked cookies with my grandchildren, attended dinners with James and Margot, smiled through every conversation and polite gesture, as if my heart hadn't been shattered into 1,000 irreparable fragments. Yet beneath that carefully constructed exterior, I had changed. I watched. I calculated. I connected subtle, previously ignored dots that had accumulated over the years. It began with tiny observations. The way Margot let out a dramatic sigh whenever I mentioned my arthritis, as though dismissing my discomfort was somehow amusing. The fleeting, almost imperceptible glances James exchanged with her whenever I forgot a minor detail, as if confirming a secret pact about my mental acuity. Their meticulous avoidance of discussing any upcoming family events at my house, a house I had poured my life into, was telling. On New Year's Day, I decided to break one of Margot's rules. I paid an unannounced visit. Normally, I never did this. Her rules had always seemed arbitrary, but I had respected them. Today, however, with a platter of homemade cinnamon rolls in hand, as my excuse, I chose defiance. "Mom," James said, genuinely startled when he opened the door, "we weren't expecting you." "I thought I'd bring something for your breakfast," I said cheerfully, lifting the platter. "Is this a bad time?" Before he could respond, I heard hurried shuffling and whispered voices from the dining room. James' eyes flicked nervously toward the sound. No, come in," he said quickly, stepping aside. "Margot's just organizing some papers." When I stepped into the dining room, the scene confirmed what my instincts had already suspected. Margot was hunched over her laptop, feverishly closing tabs, while brochures and printouts littered the table, hastily being shoved into a folder. "Jody, what a surprise," she said, her voice pitched unnaturally high. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important," I replied smoothly, placing the platter on the counter and deliberately letting my eyes fall on the paper she was trying to conceal. "Just some work stuff," she said dismissively, but I had already seen enough. One brochure bore the bold header, Golden Sun's Assisted Living. Another document, half hidden, contained dense legal language, capacity, guardianship. They weren't merely contemplating my removal, they were actively planning it, researching facilities, exploring legal avenues to seize control of my decisions if I resisted. My own son, the boy I had raised, was participating in this betrayal. "Well, don't let me disturb you," I said, forcing my voice to stay steady. "I'll just put these in the kitchen and be on my way." As I turned, my gaze landed on the refrigerator. My grandson's artwork, a crayon drawing of a house with 4 stick figures, had been innocently left there. The tallest figures labeled Mommy and Daddy, the smallest, me and Liam. Above the house, unevenly scrawled in a child's handwriting, were the words, "Our New Home." The pieces snapped together with brutal clarity. They weren't just planning to move me out. They had already begun conditioning my grandchildren to see my house as theirs. The house I had paid off 15 years ago. The home where I had raised James. The house his father and I had built, nurtured, and filled with life before cancer stole him too soon. The home I had maintained alone for a decade, occasionally accepting financial help from James, only now realizing it had come with invisible strings attached. "James," I called, my voice hollow, reverberating with a mix of hurt and disbelief. "When were you planning to tell me about moving into my house?" The silence that followed was deafening. James appeared in the kitchen doorway, his face pale. "Mom, it's not what you think." "Then what is it?" I asked, my patience fraying, weary of their carefully constructed lies. "We were going to talk to you after you'd had some time to think about your future." Margot interjected from behind him, her voice falsely gentle. "You're all alone in that big house. It doesn't make sense." "And who decided that?" I asked, my voice sharp. "You, Mom. We're concerned about you," James said, adopting the same patronizing tone he used with his children. "You've been forgetting things. The house is becoming too much for you to manage." "Forgetting things?" I echoed, incredulous. "You mean like last month when I couldn't remember which day we rescheduled your dental appointment? That's hardly dementia, James." "It's not just that," Margot pressed. Her tone clipped. "You left the stove on the last time we visited. You've fallen twice this year. We're worried something worse will happen when no one's around." I stared at them, at these strangers wearing the faces of my family. "The stove incident," I said slowly, deliberately, "happened because you called me away to help Liam with his homework while I was cooking. And I fell because your new puppy tripped me, Margot. Are those really the best examples you have of my—" They exchanged a glance, and in that fleeting moment, the truth struck me with a clarity I could no longer ignore. This wasn't about my health, my well-being, or even concern for my comfort. No, it was about my house, my belongings, and their impatient desire to claim them as if I were merely an obstacle in their way. "I think I should go," I said softly, my voice steady despite the churn of emotion beneath it as I turned toward the door. "Mom, wait," James started, his voice tentative. "No," I said, cutting him off, letting a thread of my long-suppressed anger finally surface. "I've waited long enough. I've waited for you to remember that I am still a person with dignity, not a problem to be solved or a complication to be brushed aside. I've waited for you to show even a fraction of the respect I've always given you without question. I'm done waiting." With that, I walked out. My legs carried me steadily to my car, an outward calm belying the earthquake of emotions shaking me from the inside. As I drove through the familiar streets of my neighborhood, past landmarks I had known most of my adult life, it became starkly clear. I needed to prepare for war. They had seen me as a feeble, old woman they could manipulate, a person to discard when inconvenient. They had forgotten who I was before the title of Grandma Jody defined me. A woman who had lost her husband at 45, who had kept the household and a small business afloat on her own. A woman who had walked through fire and emerged stronger, wiser, unbroken. Pulling into my driveway, I looked up at the house they were so eager to claim, a home filled with decades of memories and a life I had built with my own hands. By the time I reached the front door, a decision had crystallized within me. If they wanted to play games, I would show them exactly who was in control. This was no longer merely about self-protection. It was about teaching them a lesson, that underestimating me would be the gravest mistake of their lives. The first call I made wasn't to family. It was to Eleanor Winters, my oldest friend and a retired attorney. She had been my confidant for 30 years, through my husband's illness, the challenge of raising a teenager alone, and the trials of widowhood. Now I needed her legal mind more than her shoulder. "They want to do what?" Eleanor's voice crackled with outrage, even from 3 states away where she had retired. "Put me in a home and take my house," I repeated, the words still tasting bitter on my tongue. "And if I resist, they're looking into declaring me incompetent. Those ungrateful little—" I caught myself before the words escaped. "Jody, listen to me," she said firmly. "Before you do anything else, you need to document everything. Times, dates, conversations. Get a small recorder for your purse. Georgia is a one-party consent state, so it's perfectly legal." I wrote everything down as she spoke. Step by step, she outlined a strategy that made my head spin. Separating bank accounts, arranging medical evaluations, gathering documented proof of my competence, drafting a new will. "And Jody," she added before hanging up, "don't let them see you coming. The moment they realize you're fighting back, they'll accelerate their plans." The next morning, I made an appointment with Dr. Collins, my physician of 20 years. "Full cognitive assessment?" he asked, surprised. "Yes," I said, hesitating only briefly. My family has expressed concerns. I'd like documentation that I am fully capable of managing my own affairs." Understanding dawned in his eyes. He had seen enough family dynamics over decades to recognize the silent pressures at work. 2 hours later, I left his office with comprehensive test results, confirming what I already knew. I was sharp as ever, alert, only with the minor memory lapses normal for someone my age. Next was Meridian Bank, where I had been a loyal customer since before James was born. "I'd like to close our joint account," I told the manager, sliding my ID across the desk. The account had been created during James's father's illness. I had never removed James' name until now, seeing no reason to do so. Until now. "Of course, Mrs. Bradley. Where would you like the funds transferred?" "I'll be opening a new account at a different bank." By the end of the week, I had moved the majority of my assets to accounts only I could access, leaving just enough in the original accounts to avoid immediate suspicion. I had also retained a new attorney Eleanor recommended, one specializing in elder law, and quietly began documenting the subtle manipulations I had previously dismissed. The way Margot had reorganized my medicine cabinet, making it difficult to find my prescriptions and then pointing out my confusion to James, the sudden frequency of their conversations about my forgetfulness whenever I misplaced something minor, the casual mentions of friends' parents who were supposedly happier after moving to assisted living. Each incident went into a journal, meticulously dated and described. A clear pattern emerged, a calculated effort to make me doubt myself, to make me appear increasingly dependent. Yet outwardly, I played along. I let them believe their plan was working. When Margot suggested I was too tired to babysit, I agreed without argument. When James mentioned that managing the house must be becoming too much for me, I nodded and said nothing. I watched quietly, biding my time, my mind already mapping the next moves in a game they thought I didn't know existed. It was difficult, I sighed, and admitted as much aloud. Sometimes it genuinely felt that way, so overwhelming that I even began pausing mid-sentence, pretending to search for the right words. "See what I mean?" Margot would whisper to James, confident I couldn't hear her. "It's getting worse." Meanwhile, I wasn't idle. I started preparing in subtler, more strategic ways. I reconnected with old friends I'd neglected while focusing almost entirely on family. I joined a book club and even signed up for a water aerobics class, creating a network of connections beyond my increasingly toxic home environment. To safeguard my independence, I hired a financial advisor to maximize my retirement fund, ensuring that my resources remained firmly under my control. Most importantly, I began quietly testing the loyalties within my extended family, observing reactions and gathering clues. Over lunch with my sister-in-law, Carolyn, I mentioned casually, "James and Margot seemed concerned about my living situation." Her fork froze midair, her expression betraying a flicker of guilt. "They've been talking about that for months," she said, and then she stopped, realizing she'd said too much. "It's all right," I said gently. "How long have you known?" Her eyes welled up with tears. "Margot approached Robert last Thanksgiving, asking if you might need more supervision. When he said you seemed perfectly fine, she rattled off incident after incident, falling, forgetting things, leaving appliances on. We were worried, Jody, and now," her voice hardened as clarity took over, "now I'm wondering if we've been manipulated. Margot even mentioned that your house would probably be sold soon. She asked if we might be interested in buying some of your furniture when you downsized." By the time we parted, I had gained another ally and a deeper understanding of how far James and Margot's plans had progressed. That night, I sat alone on my back porch, watching fireflies drift lazily above the garden my late husband had lovingly planted. This was the same garden where James had taken his first steps. The home they were so eager to claim had been built with care and filled with memories, some joyous, some painful. I had endured losing the love of my life within these walls. I could endure this betrayal too. My phone buzzed. A text from James, "Dropping by tomorrow to help with that loose railing. Maybe we can talk about some options for making things easier for you." I smiled at the screen, a quiet calm settling over me. Let them come. Let them think I was willing to discuss their options. Little did they know I was crafting my own. I replied simply, "That would be lovely, dear. I'll make your favorite coffee cake." Pieces were moving into place. The game was only beginning, and this time I intended to win. February arrived unexpectedly warm, much like the sudden solicitousness of my son and daughter-in-law. James began appearing almost daily, fixing things around the house that had worked perfectly for decades. Margot brought casseroles with reheating instructions printed in oversized letters, as though I had forgotten how to use my own microwave. "Mom, we've been thinking," James said one evening, installing an entirely unnecessary grab bar in my shower. His tone was carefully casual, but his eyes betrayed the agenda. "Maybe it's time to consider some options." "Options?" I echoed, feigning confusion. "For the future," he continued, deliberate in every word. "This house is so large for just one person. And the stairs? Oh, I'm still reciprocated, lowering my voice. You think I should move?" Relief washed over his face like sunlight breaking through clouds. "There are some really nice communities we've looked into. Golden Sunset, for example. They have activities, medical staff on site, and you wouldn't have to worry about home maintenance anymore." I widened my eyes. "But what about my house, my things?" "We'd take care of everything," he said, patting my hand with condescending gentleness. "You just need to decide which special items you want to keep. The rest," he paused, weighing his words, "distribute among the family." I bit my tongue to keep from laughing. The transparency was almost comical. "I don't know, James," I said, letting my voice tremble slightly. "This is all so sudden." "Just think about it, Mom. No rush," he added, though his tone suggested anything but. "By the way, where do you keep your important papers? We should probably organize those too." I almost admired his effort to locate my will and financial documents. Almost. "I think they're in the study somewhere," I said vaguely. "I'll look for them." That night, I called Eleanor with an update. "They're accelerating their timeline," I said. "Perfect," she said, her voice carrying a quiet, satisfied smile I could hear even over the phone. "That means they'll jump at the bait." The bait was her masterstroke, a carefully planted, false trail designed to make them believe I possessed far more than they knew. Property in Florida I supposedly inherited from a cousin, investments they weren't aware of, a substantial insurance policy, all meticulously crafted fiction, yet appearing entirely legitimate. Bank statements showing transfers to inaccessible accounts, brochures for retirement communities, even subtle hints in conversation. It all reinforced the illusion. They were biting hook, line, and sinker. Florida had been marked in my notes as a potential winter retreat. If they were already assuming I was incapable of managing my own affairs, I could just as easily turn that assumption to my advantage. 2 weeks later, the trap was ready. I had gradually increased my complaints about forgetfulness, casually letting it slip into conversations. One evening, I even called James in a manufactured panic, claiming that I couldn't remember where I'd parked at the grocery store. I left medication doses unaccounted for and repeatedly mentioned the name of my financial advisor, though in reality it was Eleanor's son who was fully aware of our plan. Then I made the call I knew would spring the trap. "James, Versas," I said, my voice deliberately fragile. "I've been thinking about what you said, about the house being too much. Maybe you're right." The speed with which he and Margot appeared at my door would have been touching if I hadn't known exactly what drove them. "I've decided I should get my affairs in order," I told them, seating myself at the kitchen table where we had shared so many family meals. Margot's smile was barely restrained triumph. "That's very responsible, Jody." "I've gathered all my important papers," I continued, motioning to a folder I had carefully prepared on the table. "My will, bank information, insurance policies. I thought we could go through them together." James practically lunged for the folder. "That's a great idea, Mom." I watched as their expressions shifted while paging through the documents. Confusion first, then shock, followed by poorly concealed calculation as they realized the magnitude of what they assumed was hidden wealth. "Mom," James said slowly, "I had no idea about the Florida property or these investment accounts." "Oh, that," I said dismissively. "Cousin Martha left me her condo years ago. I never mentioned it because I rarely use it. And the investments were your father's idea. They've done quite well." Margot practically looked as if she were salivating. "And you've been managing all this yourself?" she asked. "Well, Richard helps me," I said, nodding toward Eleanor's son. "He's such a dear, always looking out for my best interests." Their eyes met briefly, a subtle look I had come to recognize well. They were recalculating, adjusting their strategy now that the stakes had risen far higher than they expected. "Mom," James said, his voice softening, almost gentle, "this is a lot for you to handle alone. Maybe we should meet with Richard together. Make sure everything's properly set up for your future care. That's a wonderful idea, I agreed with genuine enthusiasm. He's coming next week to help me update my will. I'll tell him you'll be joining us. As they left, I could hear them whispering furiously in the driveway. Phase 1 was complete. They had taken the bait. Now it was time for Phase 2. That evening, I made 2 crucial calls. The first was to Eleanor. "They're all in," I said, completely convinced. "Excellent," she replied. "Is Richard still coming Thursday?" "Right on schedule. And I've asked my new friends to drop by as well." By new friends, I meant a retired judge, a geriatric specialist from my doctor's office, and Caroline, who had been horrified upon learning the full extent of James and Margot's manipulations. They would arrive shortly after James and Margot, providing impartial witnesses to ensure everything went exactly as planned. The second call was to a locksmith to change every lock in the house. If James and Margot tried searching for the fictional assets before our meeting, they would find themselves abruptly locked out. That night, I slept better than I had in months. For so long, I had felt trapped by their expectations, by their subtle manipulations, by the thinly veiled contempt that had lingered in every interaction. Now, the tables had turned. I wasn't just defending myself. I was orchestrating an entirely new ending. For the first time, I actually looked forward to the confrontation. Let them think I was cornered. Let them believe I was a helpless old woman. Their underestimation would be their undoing. The trap was set, the pieces were in place, and I was ready. Thursday arrived with the quiet tension of a gathering storm. I spent the morning preparing, arranging coffee and cookies in the living room, checking my recording device one last time, and organizing the documents Eleanor and I had painstakingly prepared. Everything had to be flawless. At precisely 2:00 p.m., the doorbell rang. James and Margot appeared on the porch, both dressed as if for a business meeting, James in a blazer he rarely wore, Margot in a tailored dress, her smile just a touch too wide. "Mom, you look wonderful," James said, kissing my cheek. His eyes flicked past me, scanning the living room. "Is Richard here yet?" "He'll be along shortly," I assured him, gesturing toward the seating area. "I thought we could chat first." Margot immediately took charge, producing a folder of her own. "We've brought some information about Golden," and with that, the first real confrontation of our carefully orchestrated plan began. "Sunset," she said, spreading a stack of glossy brochures across my coffee table. "They have an opening in their premium wing. We've already put down a deposit to hold it." I raised an eyebrow, letting my surprise show, just enough to feign ignorance. "A deposit? That's very generous," I murmured, letting my gaze linger on the brochures. "But it's refundable, I assume?" James jumped in, a touch too quickly. "We just didn't want to miss the opportunity. The waiting list is usually 6 months long." "How thoughtful," I said softly, watching them exchange quick, subtle glances, the kind that tried to reassure each other, silently. Margot leaned forward, lowering her voice as though sharing a secret. "Jody, we've been talking with Dr. Mercer. You remember him from the Christmas party? He specializes in geriatric care, and he believes that once you decide, it would be best to make this transition quickly." I nodded slowly, cataloging her words in my mind as what they were: fabricated medical advice meant to push me. "And my house? My belongings?" I asked carefully, trying to sound casual but keeping my guard up. "We'd handle everything," James answered, almost too eagerly. "You wouldn't need to worry about a thing." "And the Florida property?" I asked innocently, letting curiosity seem natural. "Would you manage that as well?" Their eyes brightened instantly. "Absolutely," Margot said with a confidence that felt rehearsed. "We could look after all your properties and investments." The doorbell rang again. I stood, masking my irritation. "That must be Richard," I said, stepping toward the door. It wasn't Richard. It was Dr. Collins, my real physician, followed closely by Judge Wilson, Caroline, and Eleanor. Their timing was precise, almost cinematic. James' voice sharpened the moment the group entered my living room. "What's this?" I stayed calm, my tone even and deliberate. "A few friends joining our discussion. I hope you don't mind." Confusion crossed their faces at first, quickly replaced by the wary weariness of being confronted. Everyone settled into seats, the air thick with tension. Richard arrived shortly after, briefcase in hand, his professional demeanor highlighting the stark contrast to James and Margot's nervous energy. Now that everyone was here, I straightened, letting a firmness creep into my voice, the strength I hadn't felt in months. "I'd like to clarify a few things." I turned to Dr. Collins. "Doctor, would you share the results of my recent cognitive assessment?" He nodded, pulling a folder from his briefcase. Mrs. Bradley is in excellent cognitive health for her age. There are no indications of dementia or any condition that would impair her decision-making capacity. Margot's face flushed, a mix of frustration and panic creeping into her carefully maintained composure. "With all due respect, doctor," she said, her tone attempting authority, "we've noticed concerning behaviors at home." "Like what?" I interrupted sharply, my voice icy. "Forgetting where I parked that one time, when you had actually moved my car to help me? Or leaving the stove on after you called me away while I was cooking? Perhaps you mean the medications I've supposedly forgotten to take, the ones that are actually optional supplements you rearranged in my cabinet?" James paled, words failing him. "Mom, what are you saying?" he asked, desperation seeping into his voice. "I'm saying I heard you and Margot at Christmas, planning to put me in a nursing home so you could take my house," I said, each word deliberate, echoing in the room. "I'm saying I've documented months of your attempts to make me appear incompetent, and I'm saying it stops today." The silence that followed was suffocating, charged with disbelief. Margot was the first to recover, her face hardening. "This is ridiculous. You're clearly confused and paranoid. This just proves our point." "Actually," Eleanor interjected, her voice steady, "Jody has recordings of your conversations. Legal in this state, by the way. She also has witnesses to your attempts to manipulate her medical care and financial decisions." Judge Wilson nodded gravely. "If what I've heard is accurate, this could constitute elder abuse, which I take very seriously." James' facade crumbled. "Mom, there's been a misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding," I said firmly, the authority in my voice leaving no room for argument. "You've been planning this for months, and if I hadn't caught you, you would have followed through." I turned to Richard, who had remained a composed professional through the tension. "Would you please explain the changes to my estate planning?" Richard opened his briefcase and extracted a document. "Miss Bradley has made several amendments to her will and has established a trust for her assets. The house will be placed in an irrevocable trust with terms that prevent it from being sold during her lifetime. She has also designated new medical and financial powers of attorney." "New?" Margot whispered, her voice trembling. "Yes," I confirmed, my tone quiet but absolute. "Neither of you will have any legal authority over my care or my property ever again." "But the Florida condo," James began, desperation finally cracking his voice. "The investment accounts?" I laughed, a clear, genuine sound. The first in months that had no edge of anger but pure amusement. "There is no Florida condo, James. No secret investments. That was bait to reveal your true intentions, and you swallowed it. Hook, line, and sinker." The color drained from their faces as understanding set in. Caroline, who had witnessed their manipulations firsthand, shook her head with disgust. "You would have put your own mother in a home against her will," she said, voice thick with disappointment. "For a house. How could you?" James's eyes glistened with tears, his voice breaking. "Mom, please. We were just worried about you. We wanted to make sure you were taken care of." "Save it," Ina said, raising my hand, my resolve absolute. I had heard enough lies to last a lifetime. I wasn't going to cut him out of my life, not entirely. He was still my son, and I still loved him. But things were going to be different from now on. There would be boundaries. There would be consequences. I stood there feeling taller, stronger, and more resolute than I had in years. Now I thought, this meeting is over. I'll let you know when I'm ready to talk again. As they left, their shoulders slumped in defeat. And then I saw something I hadn't expected. Real, genuine shame on James's face. He paused at the door, and for a moment, I thought he might speak. "Mom, he started, but the words failed him. "Go home, James," I said quietly. "Think about who you've become and decide who you want to be." The door closed behind them, and for the first time in months, I breathed freely in my own home. 6 months can change everything. As summer faded into autumn, the trees in my backyard blazed with fiery reds and golden yellows, a fitting metaphor for the transformation unfolding in my own life. After the confrontation, James and Margot had retreated into stunned silence. No calls, no visits, not even messages about the grandchildren. I expected to ache over their absence, but instead I found myself embracing the peace their distance provided. Caroline stepped in, bringing my grandchildren for weekend visits, ensuring they understood that Grandma's house was still a safe place filled with love. "They miss you," she told me during one such visit. Especially James, he's not the same. I nodded, neither fully accepting nor rejecting her words. He needs to find his own way back, I said simply, letting the thought settle between us. My new life began to take shape in ways I hadn't anticipated. The book club I joined as a pretense became a genuine source of joy. Twice weekly water aerobics classes strengthened not just my body, but my circle of friends, women my age with their own stories of rebuilding after loss, betrayal, or major life changes. You should see the look on your face these days, Eleanor commented during one of her visits. You're glowing. I smiled, knowing she was right. Freedom looked good on me. Freedom meant redecorating the living room in colors Margot had always dismissed as too bright. Freedom meant converting James's old bedroom into an art studio, where I rediscovered my passion for painting. It meant traveling to the coast for a week with new friends, something I would never have dared to do when my life revolved around my family's expectations. The first sign of change came 3 months after the confrontation. A handwritten letter from James. No excuses, no justifications, just a simple acknowledgement of wrongdoing and a request. When you're ready, I'd like to talk. I waited another month before responding, taking the time to consult with Eleanor and my therapist, another positive change I had made for myself. When I finally called him, I suggested we meet on neutral ground at a small coffee shop downtown. He arrived early, somehow looking older than his years, his nervousness evident in the fidgeting of his hands. Mom, he began, then faltered, gathering his thoughts. I don't know where to start. How about the truth? I suggested gently. That's always a good place to start. He nodded, eyes downcast. The truth is, I got lost somewhere along the way. Margot and we've been struggling financially. The business isn't doing well, and we're underwater on the house. When she started talking about how much easier things would be if we had your place, it seemed like a solution that required erasing my autonomy, he admitted, voice breaking. Yes, he whispered. It was wrong. So wrong. I don't expect forgiveness, Mom. I just wanted you to know I see what I did now, what I almost became. And then with a shadow crossing his face, he added, and Margot, we're separated. Have been for 2 months now. After everything came out, I started seeing other patterns. Ways she manipulated not just you, but me, the kids, everyone. I reached across the table and took his hand, surprised by my own compassion. I'm sorry for that part of it, James, I said softly. Don't be, he said firmly. It needed to happen. I needed to wake up. We talked for nearly 3 hours that day, peeling back layers of misunderstanding and hurt. He cried when I described how it felt to hear them plotting against me at Christmas. I cried when he shared how thoroughly he had been convinced that I was declining, a narrative Margot had carefully constructed over years. I'd like to earn back your trust, he said as we parted. However long it takes, I added. It will take time, I told him honestly. But we had that time now. The reconstruction of our relationship began slowly. Sunday dinners, just the two of us, occasional outings with the grandchildren. Each interaction carefully bounded by the new rules I had established. Respect for my decisions, honesty in all communications, no assumptions about my capabilities. I maintained my independence fiercely. I accepted help with house repairs only when I truly needed it, not as a matter of routine or habit. Each offer was weighed carefully, each decision deliberate. When he suggested family gatherings, I considered each invitation on its own merits, refusing to automatically say yes out of obligation or guilt. Slowly, a new equilibrium emerged, loving but not self-sacrificing, connected but not trapped. The balance felt right and it felt like mine. On a crisp October evening, exactly 6 months after the confrontation that had reshaped everything, I hosted a dinner party. Around my table sat the pieces of my reconstructed family. James Solo, Caroline and her husband, my grandchildren, Eleanor and her son Richard, and a scattering of friends from my book club and water aerobics class. As I carried the dessert, an apple pie baked from fruit grown in my own garden, I paused for a moment, taking in the scene. Laughter filled the room, lifting the ghost that had once weighed it down with manipulation and deceit. My home, once a battleground of hidden agendas and quiet betrayals, was finally mine again. Not a prize to be claimed, but a sanctuary I chose to share with those who recognized and respected my worth. Everything okay, Mom? James asked, noticing my momentary stillness. I smiled, feeling the weight of the past year pressing and receding all at once, the hurt, the betrayal, the fight, and now, finally, the quiet ache of healing. Everything is exactly as it should be, I replied, letting the words settle between us. Later, as the guests trickled out and James helped with the last of the dishes, he asked the question I had long expected. Do you think you'll ever fully trust me again? I considered my answer carefully, honoring both our journeys and the honesty we now owed each other. I trust the person you are becoming, I said at last, the man who's doing the hard work of rebuilding himself. That's enough for now. He nodded, accepting this limited but genuine offering without argument. After he left, I wandered through my quiet house, brushing my fingers over the walls, the furniture, the photographs that chronicled my life. This home had borne witness to my greatest joys and deepest sorrows. It had nearly become the arena of a bitter struggle that might have torn apart what remained of my family. Instead, it had become a stage for redemption, not just for James, but for me as well. I had discovered a strength I had long forgotten. I had forged connections beyond the narrow confines of family. I had learned that it is never too late to stand up for yourself, to demand respect, to reclaim the narrative others tried to impose upon you. As I prepared for bed, I caught my reflection in the bedroom mirror. There were the same lines, the same streaks of gray hair, the same aging body that Margot and James had once used to mark my decline. But now I saw something they had missed. The wisdom etched in each line, the quiet dignity in the silver, the resilience in the body that had carried me through 70 years of life. I smiled at my reflection, silently promising the woman staring back at me, I will never again allow anyone to make me believe I am less than I am. The unexpected inheritance of this turbulent year was not property or money or possessions. It was the reclamation of myself, whole, worthy, and finally genuinely free.